Death is a natural part of life and varies greatly from person to person in terms of its significance and how it is viewed. Generally, death is seen as a sad event, the end of life, and is usually accompanied by feelings of grief and loss. Death and dying were fields that had received little attention until a psychologist named Elisabeth Kübler-Ross began observing people who were in the process of dying. As Kübler-Ross witnessed people's transition toward death, she found some common threads in their experiences. She observed that the process had 5 distinct stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Kübler-Ross found that a person's first reaction to the prospect of dying is denial. This is characterized by the person's not wanting to believe he or she is dying, with common thoughts such as "I feel fine" or "this is not really happening to me." The second stage is anger, when loss of life is seen as unfair and unjust. A person then resorts to the third stage, bargaining, trying to negotiate with a higher power to postpone the inevitable by reforming or changing the way he or she lives. The fourth stage, psychological depression, allows for resignation as the situation begins to seem hopeless. In the final stage, a person adjusts to the idea of death and reaches acceptance. At this point, the person can face death honestly, by regarding it as a natural and inevitable part of life, and can make the most of their remaining time. However, for some, death can be seen as a positive experience, the culmination of a life well lived, a reuniting of lost loved ones, or an entry into a spiritual afterlife. How death is viewed can also be influenced by traditional and religious beliefs. For example, some religions may view death as a transition to a better life in the afterlife, while others view it as a permanent and unavoidable part of life. Death can also be seen as an opportunity to gain perspective and appreciation. There is also a great deal of respect for the stages of mourning, and those who have encountered death personally are typically given a great deal of compassion and understanding. The views on death and dying vary greatly and are often based on religious and cultural beliefs. Generally speaking, most people do not like to think or talk about death, but still view it as a part of life that can be a source of learning and growth. Many religions encourage looking at death as a transition from earthly life to the hereafter. For example, those of the Christian faith look to Jesus Christ's crucifixion and resurrection as proof that death is not the end. There is an emphasis on maintaining a hopeful outlook on death and reflecting on what has been achieved in life. At the same time, people view death as a natural process and believe it's important to make the best of life until it's time to depart. People often talk about death as if it's something that will happen to them in the distant future, yet death is happening all around us. Grief and sadness are usually expressed openly when it involves a loved one. It's also becoming more common for people to engage in conversations about mortality due to advances in medical technology and other scientific innovations. In some cases, death is viewed as a taboo topic. The attitudes of human society towards death and dying are constantly shifting, depending on the situation and each individual's beliefs. It's a difficult subject to tackle, but overall there is a strong focus on honoring the deceased and being prepared for the inevitable. People's perspective on death has been heavily influenced by a combination of religious beliefs and cultural practices, which together have resulted in a deep-rooted view of death as an inevitability. While it is natural to grieve the loss of a loved one, many people have come to accept that death is a transition that can be both meaningful and peaceful. This is especially true for those who find solace in the idea that the spirit of their loved one is still with them in some way. There is also a great deal of respect for the stages of mourning, and those who have encountered death personally are typically given a great deal of compassion and understanding. In general, Americans are likely to strive for celebrations of life rather than mourning rituals. This can be seen in the prominence of memorial services and funerals featuring personal stories, songs, and photographs that focus on the unique beauty of the departed's life. This is especially true in the case of those who died in service to their country, as the American public tends to hold those individuals in high regard, honoring them with military funerals and parades. Overall, people often choose to focus on the memories of loved ones and celebrate the unique life that has passed. Grief, in this context, becomes manageable, producing a collective worldview of acceptance and hope. It is hard to think about death for a variety of reasons. Death is a difficult topic to think about, as it raises questions about mortality, loss, and the unknown. It is also emotionally challenging because it can bring up feelings of grief, regret, anger, sadness, and other complex emotions. Additionally, death forces us to confront our own mortality and potentially question the meaning and purpose of life. Not only is it incredibly painful to think of leaving loved ones behind, it can also be difficult to make sense of why death occurs, and why some people have to die so young. Furthermore, contemplating death can cause us to feel overwhelmed, anxious, and powerless, particularly when considering the sheer randomness of it. Death is a natural part of life, but that doesn't make it any easier to think about. Finally, many cultures view death as a time of transformation rather than a definitive end. In some cases, cultural beliefs emphasize the idea of rebirth and reincarnation, while in others they highlight the belief in a spiritual realm or a journey to the afterlife.